Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Silister here with another classic WoW video. In this one, we'll be talking about all the different racial abilities available to the Horde. We'll discuss in detail each and every Horde racial ability. We'll briefly talk about each race's starting base stats, as these will vary slightly. And throughout, we'll be discussing which class choices are best for each race. However, before we begin, it's important to keep in mind that in Classic WoW, your main character's race class identity will be much more impactful on how you feel about playing the game. In my experience, it's much more important to play the race you want to play, regardless of what racial abilities are available. Classic WoW will be very different from modern versions of WoW. Playing the game is much more committing on a single character, and these kinds of things might matter a lot more to you come Classic. With that being said, we'll start off with Orc. The first racial for Orcs is Blood Fury. Blood Fury is a melee DPS cooldown that boosts your base attack power by 25% for 15 seconds. It also reduces healing effects on you by 50% for 25 seconds. It has a 2-minute cooldown. It's important to note that this is an increase to your base attack power, not overall attack power. This comes out to about an extra 100 attack power at level 60, which is still a significant damage boost. Blood Fury is on the global cooldown, but it does stack with on-use trinkets and other damage cooldown abilities for your class, so keep this in mind if you're going to macro these things together. Due to the 50% healing reduction debuff from this ability, Blood Fury is going to be out of the question for Orc Warrior tanks, and honestly, anyone playing Orc should pay attention to when you're going to use Blood Fury, so the healing reduction doesn't get you killed. In later versions of WoW, Blood Fury was changed to include range attack power and a spell power boost, but in Classic it's only going to raise your melee attack power. The next Orc racial is Hardiness. Hardiness passively increases your chance to resist stun effects by 25%. This is a very good racial for PvP, but also very powerful and underrated in PvE. In Classic WoW, stuns are everything in PvP, and as an Orc, you'll be flat out resisting stuns an extra 25% of the time. This racial is amazing for PvP combat, and it will be an absolute game changer out there in many fights. In PvE content, Hardiness will still help you out in a lot of different places. There are quite a few stun effects you'll come across in 5-mans and raids that can be resisted. Also, in many cases, stun effects also deal damage, and when you resist the stun, it prevents the damage taken as well. This bit is based on private server data though, so this may not be the case in Classic. So overall, an extra 25% stun resist makes a great racial. Next, we have Axe Specialization. Axe Specialization increases your maximum weapon skill with 1- and 2-handed axes by 5. So what exactly does this mean? Well, in Classic WoW, weapon skills will be a thing again. For each level you gain, your weapon skill cap is raised by 5, up to a maximum of 300 at level 60. So for every 1 weapon skill you gain beyond the cap of 300, you will get an extra 0.4 chance to hit and 0.4 chance to crit with that type of weapon. So for Orcs, this means at level 60, you'll have an extra 2% chance to hit and crit with 1- and 2-handed axes, which is a pretty meaningful damage boost. Additionally, in Classic WoW, Glancing Blows will return to the hit table as they were during Vanilla. Glancing Blows are low-chance melee attacks that glance off the target, dealing less damage than normal. I'm honestly not too familiar with how Glancing Blows work in Classic, but I know that weapon skill reduces the chance of landing a Glancing Blow, which I'm told adds significant value to the weapon skill stat. All in all, Axe Specialization will mainly benefit warriors, since they're pretty much the only Orc class that will be meleeing with axes at max level. And finally, we have Command. Command passively increases damage dealt by Hunter and Warlock pets by 5%. So this racial is a little less exciting, since it's only going to benefit these 2 classes. A 5% damage boost to pets will help them keep aggro a little better while you're leveling, but at level 60, pet damage is a bit more negligible, so Hunters and Warlocks won't really even see a difference here. Overall, the Orc racial abilities are best suited for melee classes like Warriors and Rogues. Blood Fury is going to provide a nice DPS cooldown, and Axe Specialization will further boost the damage of Orc Warriors that are using axes. Hardiness, the extra 25% stun resist, will benefit all classes, mainly the melee, since the vast majority of stuns in Classic are dealt out at melee range. And of course, all these melee racials will benefit an enhancement shaman as well, but these are less common to see, especially in PvE. Most shamans are forced into healing at max level. Alright, moving on to the next race, we have Trolls. Trolls will return to their original starting zone in Classic WoW, which was the Valley of Trials, shared with the Orcs. The Troll racials are pretty interesting, so let's get started. First, we have Berserking. Berserking increases melee attack, ranged attack, and spell casting speed by 10 to 30% for 10 seconds. The speed increase is based on your current health when you activate Berserking. 10% increase at full health, up to 30% when activated at low health. This racial is infinitely useful for all classes and roles, since raid-wide damage is pretty common in Classic. It can also be a useful boost in PvP and open world content as well. Berserking is off the global cooldown, and it does stack with trinkets and other damage abilities for your class. Oddly, Berserking is the only racial ability in the game that has a mana cost. The mana cost of Berserking scales up with your level, up to 120 mana at level 60. It also has a resource cost of 5 rage and 10 energy for warriors and rogues. It's not a lot, but it costs everybody something to pop Berserking. Although the speed boost you stand to gain from Berserking will vary from use to use, making it kind of a wild card, there are players out there who make a strong argument that Troll Berserking is the best racial ability in the game. Next Troll racial is Bow Specialization. Bow skill increased by 5. So just like we talked about with Orcs, weapon skill raised beyond the cap of 300 provides an additional 0.4% hit and 0.4% crit with that type of weapon. Weapon skill also reduces your chance of landing a glancing blow, dealing less damage. However, glancing blows only apply to melee attacks, so this doesn't come into play when talking about bow hits. This racial grants an extra 2% hit and 2% crit with bows, which is going to be great for hunters, but not for anyone else. Trolls also get throwing specialization for an extra 5 throwing weapon skill. This is pretty much useless though. Throwing weapons are kind of garbage in Classic, since everyone will opt for a gun or a bow with stats as soon as they're available. Hunters can't use range abilities with throwing weapons, so this racial basically goes unnoticed. The next Troll racial is Regeneration. Troll Regeneration increases health regeneration by 10% and allows 10% of your health to regenerate during combat. This racial sounds a lot more useful than it actually is. Regenerating health a little faster may help slightly while leveling, but this has been tested in endgame raids, and the results have never shown a real meaningful contribution to keeping you alive. It is cool though to see some of these abilities like Berserking and Regeneration get carried over from Warcraft 3. And final racial for Trolls is Beast Slaying. Beast Slaying passively increases damage dealt to beasts by 5%. This is a decent racial, but it won't always be helpful, since there are only a few raid bosses in Classic that are beasts. This is really more impactful for the leveling process and for farming mobs out in the open world. The 5% damage boost isn't crazy, but it's 5% more than everybody else, so there you go. Overall, Trolls have very good racials, Berserking being the best since it's a helpful boost for all classes and roles. Bow Specialization makes Trolls the strongest choice for rolling a hunter. No other racial is as strong for hunters. Berserking makes Trolls a good choice for just about all classes, honestly. It's just really good. Moving on, the next race to cover is the Undead, aka the Forsaken. The Undead racials are more centered around utility than damage, so these should be interesting. First up, we have Will of the Forsaken. Will of the Forsaken removes and provides immunity to charm, sleep, and fear effects for 5 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. This will be incredibly useful for PvP for negating fear effects, but it's also very strong in many PvE situations. Sleep and charm effects are less common, but fear effects will be prevalent in Classic WoW. As a tank, you can quickly remove fear to prevent mobs from killing your group. As a priest, you can break out of fear to keep heals up on your group. As a DPS, Any time spent dealing damage versus running around the room feared will be a big plus. There are also plenty of PvE charm effects that can be negated by Will of the Forsaken. The only one that comes to mind right now is the Mind Flay on the trash mobs between Twin Emps and Sethune. The Mind Slayer mobs here will Mind Flay somebody, which ticks for high damage and makes you lose control of your character as if you've been death coiled. You can use Will of the Forsaken to remove this immediately, which is super helpful. There are a few other cases like this where Will of the Forsaken can really help you out. It's worth noting that Will of the Forsaken is on the global cooldown, so breaking Fear will cost you a GCD. This is where it comes in handy to pre-pop this ability in order to become immune to whatever effect you're looking to negate. This can backfire though if not used correctly, so the choice will be yours to make in each situation. So overall, this racial provides you with a good utility to break out of fear and other crowd control effects. This racial will save your life countless times in PvP and PvE. The next undead racial is Cannibalize. The Cannibalize ability allows you to consume humanoid and undead corpses, regenerating 7% of your total health every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. So it regens 35% of your health over 10 seconds. If you move or take damage while you're eating a corpse, it cancels Cannibalize. So this is a helpful regen utility. It can be used in combat, but your first aid bandages are still going to be a better in-combat option. They typically restore more health over only 8 seconds if you're using bandages equivalent to your level. Otherwise, Cannibalize can be a helpful regen ability that, while leveling, allows you to quickly gain some health between mobs. Warriors, rogues, and warlocks will probably be cannibalizing the most out there. Realistically though, this ability just allows you to go through fewer bandages. Eating food out of combat also restores health marginally slower than Cannibalize. I mean, let's face it, the coolest thing about Cannibalize, and it is cool, is killing somebody in world PvP and making them watch you eat their corpse. If you play undead, you get to do this. Next up is Underwater Breathing. This racial passively increases your underwater breathing time by 300%. Not exactly a DPS increase, but there are times when this is helpful. For the most part, you won't notice this racial, until you're in the situations where you do. The last undead racial is Shadow Resistance. Passively increases Shadow Resistance by 10. Yeah, so spell resistances will be a thing again in Classic WoW. 10 of any spell resist won't really do anything for you on its own, but it's a helpful boost in situations that call for stacking a certain spell resistance. The only Shadow Resistance fight that comes to mind is Twin Emperors, where Warlocks have to stack Shadow Resistance so they can tank the one that casts the Shadow Bolt. Anyway, not a super helpful racial, but there are a lot of shadow damage abilities you'll be going up against in Classic WoW, so Shadow Resist isn't the worst kind to have. That's it for undead racials. Overall, they're okay. It's really all about Will of the Forsaken. This racial ability makes undead the better choice if you're looking to PvP. It's just so strong. You'll use it a lot, especially in battlegrounds. For PvP, it really benefits all classes. Rogues might see the most use of this ability though, since their success depends on staying in melee range. This might explain why most infamously annoying PvP rogues were undead. Anyway, the final race for the Horde is the Tauren. Tauren are the biggest of all races. Back in vanilla, their hitbox was slightly bigger due to their size, but their melee swing range was also slightly further than other races. It will be interesting to see if this is the case in Classic WoW. The first Tauren ability is War Stomp. War Stomp stuns up to 5 enemies within 8 yards for 2 seconds, and it has a 2-minute cooldown with a 0.5 second cast time. This is a super good ability. I'm not sure if there are any other AoE stuns in the game, but this ability can provide some great utility in a lot of situations. For most classes, War Stomp will help you heal up or run away if you get into trouble, but for warriors, War Stomp will help you out with a lot of tanking situations. Especially at lower levels when it's harder to produce a lot of threat, War Stomp allows you to stun a whole pack of mobs and start landing a few hits to get threat, so they don't just run around and kill your healer. This honestly makes War Stomp helpful for anyone in the group to have as a quick form of crowd control for the more difficult pulls. With a short cooldown of 2 minutes, you'll be able to use this ability every 2 to 3 dungeon pulls. War Stomp is also great in PvP. Stuns are life and death in PvP, and having one more stun than everyone else makes you a serious threat. It's also worth noting that Tauren druids are not able to War Stomp while shapeshifted, so feral druids have to pop back into Tauren form to use War Stomp. The next racial for Tauren is Cultivation. Cultivation passively increases your herbalism skill by 15. This will only be useful for you if you're taking herbalism as a trade skill. If not, this won't do anything for you. As a Tauren herbalist, the racial will allow you to pick a few higher level herbs while leveling herbalism. Additionally, at the max level herbalism cap of 300, everyone has a small chance to fail at gathering a Black Lotus. As a Tauren maxed out at 315 herbalism, you'll never have this problem. Not very game changing, I know, but still worth pointing out. The last racial for Taurens is Nature Resistance. Passively increases nature resistance by 10. Like we talked about before with spell resistances, having 10 of any spell resist won't do much for you on its own, but if you ever need to build up a certain spell resistance for certain fights, an extra 10 will help you out. Nature resistance is mostly needed for Ahn'Qiraj, really just for fighting Princess Huhuran. Not everyone needs nature resist for this fight though, but warriors do. All in all, the Tauren racials are strongest for tanking, but also pretty good for other classes as well. You're going to see a lot of Tauren warrior tanks in Classic WoW. Tauren also have the highest potential for cow name puns, but this doesn't end up being a DPS increase. So now that we've covered all the racial abilities of all 4 Horde races, we can really begin to discuss the class choices for each race. This table shows all the race class options with the starting base stats for each race over on the right. We'll go down the line by class and really lay down the options. Starting with priests, the choices are Undead and Troll. So this is going to come down to Will of the Forsaken versus Berserking. Will of the Forsaken is more useful in PvP, and Berserking will be more useful in PvE, so it really comes down to what you think you'll be doing more of. For rogues, your options are Orc, Undead, and Troll. All 3 classes for rogues make good options. All 3 are viable. Orc and Troll are probably going to have the edge in PvE based on their melee DPS cooldowns. If the stun resist is important to you, kind of being the best of both worlds, PvP and PvE, I would roll an Orc. If you're purely looking for PvE damage, I would roll a Troll. And if you're looking to PvP and do all sorts of other things, I would be Undead to get Will of the Forsaken. Next up is Warriors. So all races in Classic WoW can be Warriors. Starting with Orcs, Blood Fury and Axe Specialization are going to be a huge boost for Orc Warriors. Will of the Forsaken is going to be a good utility for breaking out of fear, which helps Warriors a lot in a few different ways. Tauren warriors benefit from the 5% increased health, and War Stomp is also a good control ability for warriors to have. And trolls have Berserking, which is great. So, which ones are the best? It's going to be Orc and Troll are going to be the best for PvE damage. Tauren is going to be the best type of tanking warrior because of that 5% health increase. And Undead are going to be very good in PvP because they're going to have a second ability to break out of fear in Will of the Forsaken. So all in all, for Warrior, it depends on what you want to play, but Orc and Troll are very safe damage choices. Mage. Now, mages, the same choice exists for priests between Undead and Troll. Trolls have the better DPS cooldown in Berserking, and Undead have the better utility cooldown in Will of the Forsaken. It really comes down to what you prefer. PvP, Undead shine because of Will of the Forsaken. PvE, Troll have the advantage because of Berserking. It's really up to you. For Druids, the only race available is Tauren, and since Tauren do have the 5% health increase, Bear Druids will have 5% increased health. And yes, Druid tanks are viable in Classic WoW. Hunters. The choices are Orc, Tauren, and Troll. The only thing helpful that Orcs have is the 5% increased pet damage. Tauren have the utility of War Stomp with an increased 5% health, which is helpful for everybody. And Trolls have Berserking and Bow Specialization. And because of that, Trolls make the best hunters. The second best choice is going to be between Orc or Tauren. It depends on what kind of utility you want. Do you want War Stomp, or do you want 25% stun resist? Do you want 5% increased health, or do you want 5% increased pet damage? It's really up to you. In terms of stats, Trolls have the highest agility, so they have the best stats for hunters as well. Tauren have the lowest agility out of all the races, so it's not much, but it's something to consider. Next class is Warlock, and the choices are Orc and Undead. So Orcs have that 5% increased Warlock pet damage, and that is about it in terms of racials that benefit Warlocks. Undead will have Cannibalize, which is slightly helpful for Warlocks since they go through a lot of health. Will of the Forsaken is very strong for Warlocks, allowing Undead Warlocks to be able to fear others but not be feared by others, which is very strong in PvP. Overall, Undead and Orc have very similar stats when it comes to Warlock stats, so this isn't going to be much of a difference. It's another one of those cases where would you rather have Will of the Forsaken or 25% stun resist? Both are very handy to have in different situations. Next class is Shaman. Shaman can be played by Orc, Tauren, or Trolls. Shaman are sort of a hybrid class that has melee, spell power damage, and healing. Depends on what spec you like to play. Most people level up as Enhancement, and the Orc racials complement Enhancement Shamans more than the others. Tauren Shamans can War Stomp and heal themselves, which is nice and handy to have. 5% increased health is also a helpful racial for everybody. Trolls have Berserking, which is super helpful for Shamans. It's a good cooldown to increase healing during tough moments. All choices for Shaman are decent. It mostly depends on what type of gameplay you like most. Troll will probably be the strongest for PvE because of Berserking, and Tauren and Orc will be also strong in all situations because of their utility. It really just depends on what you're looking for. And then we have Paladins, which of course the Horde cannot be in Classic. So what can we conclude from all this? It really seems to me like the first thing to consider when choosing a race is how you play the game. It mostly depends what you're into: PvP, raiding, dungeons, running around the open world, doing a little bit of everything. For some people, the highest DPS throughput will be the clear choice, but for others, Classic WoW presents far more options. You're going to be spending a lot of time with your main character, so it's really worth thinking it through. Thanks for watching the video if you made it this far. This was a lot of information and it took me a lot of time to put this video together, so if you found this helpful, please support the channel by commenting and liking the video and all that stuff. I'm already working on another video like this for the Alliance races, so keep an eye out for that one. There might be some other videos in between. We seem to be getting a lot more updates recently. We've got a release date and closed beta to preview, so I'll be making some videos about some of this stuff, as well as some other guides about Classic WoW things we can look forward to reliving once again. So, we'll see you in the next one, and thanks for watching.